My name is Lena Whitmore. I'm 25 years old. And for the first 20 years of my life, my father had only one name for me. Mistake. Not Lena, not daughter. Just mistake. It started so early that I don't even remember the first time he said it. But I remember the way everyone reacted. My mom would look down at her plate. My younger brothers would laugh awkwardly. My aunt would change the subject. And my dad, he would just smile like it was the funniest joke in the world. Relax, he'd say. I'm kidding. But when someone repeats the same joke for 20 years, it stops being a joke. It becomes a belief. I grew up in a large suburban house outside the city. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family. Holiday dinners, family vacations, matching Christmas photos. But inside that house, I always felt like I didn't belong. My brothers looked exactly like my dad. Dark hair, sharp jawline, brown eyes. Meanwhile, I had blonde hair and blue eyes. My father noticed that difference from the moment I was born, and he never let anyone forget it. "Are we sure she's mine?" He would laugh at family gatherings. Everyone would chuckle nervously. I learned to laugh too. Because when you're a child, laughing is easier than crying, but the joke followed me everywhere. Birthdays, graduations, family barbecues, even my college graduation dinner. When the waiter asked if we were celebrating anything special, my dad raised his glass and said, "We're celebrating the biggest surprise of my life." Everyone laughed. Then he looked at me, my accidental daughter. The table went quiet. I smiled anyway, because by that point, I had spent 2 decades pretending it didn't hurt. But nothing prepared me for what happened last Thanksgiving. That night changed everything. Every year, our family hosts a huge Thanksgiving dinner. 30 relatives, long wooden table, turkey, mashed potatoes, wine, loud conversations. The house smelled like roasted garlic and cinnamon candles. For most people, Thanksgiving is about gratitude. For me, it was always about survival. That year, I arrived late. Work had kept me in the city all afternoon. When I walked in, the house was already full. My cousin waved from the kitchen. "Lena, we thought you weren't coming. I wouldn't miss Dad's favorite holiday," I joked. She gave me a sympathetic look. Everyone knew. No one said anything. Dinner started normally. Plates passed around, glasses clinking, football playing in the background. My father sat at the head of the table like always, commanding the room. Halfway through dinner, he suddenly stood up and tapped his fork against his glass. Clink, clink, clink. The room went silent. "Oh boy," my uncle whispered. My dad loved making speeches. "Well," my father began, grinning, "before dessert, I have a little Thanksgiving surprise." Everyone looked curious. He reached under the table and pulled out a small box. White minimalist. I didn't recognize it at first. Then he slid it across the table toward me, and I saw the logo. DNA test kit. The room exploded with laughter. My cousin nearly choked on her drink. "Oh my God," someone said. My dad leaned back in his chair, clearly proud of himself. "Well, Lena," he said loudly, "let's finally solve the family mystery." More laughter. Then he delivered the line that would echo in my head for weeks. "Let's see if you're even mine." My mother's smile froze instantly. "Richard," she whispered, but my father ignored her. The whole table was watching me, waiting for my reaction, waiting for me to laugh. Like always, for 20 years, that's exactly what I did. I laughed. I made jokes. I played along. But that night, something inside me changed. I slowly picked up the DNA kit, turned it over in my hands, studied the instructions. My dad smirked. "Come on," he said. "It's just a joke." I looked him directly in the eyes. for the first time in my life. "Okay," I said calmly. "I'll take the test." The laughter stopped immediately. My father blinked. He hadn't expected that. No one had. 3 weeks later, the results arrived in my email. I stared at the screen for a long time, reading the report again, and again, and again, because what it revealed didn't just prove something about me. It proved something about everyone else, including my father and my mother. That night, I did something my family would never forget. I forwarded the results to every single relative. 32 email addresses, 1 attachment, 1 message. Subject line, Thanksgiving joke, final results. The next family dinner was supposed to be quiet, normal, routine. But when my father opened that email at the table, my mother fainted, my father dropped his fork, and the entire family realized something terrifying. Because the DNA test proved one shocking truth, I wasn't the mistake. I was the only biological child my father actually had. 3 weeks later, the results arrived. I remember the exact moment the email notification appeared on my phone. I was sitting alone in my small apartment kitchen, the same place where I had filled the tiny plastic tube with my saliva and sealed it inside the DNA kit box weeks earlier. Back then, it had felt like a joke. A stupid Thanksgiving stunt my father thought was hilarious. Now it didn't feel funny anymore. My hands hovered over the phone screen for several seconds before I finally opened the message. The subject line was simple: "Your DNA results are ready." For a moment, I just stared at it. A strange feeling settled in my chest, something between curiosity and dread. Because deep down, I realized something. If the test proved my father right, it would mean my entire childhood suddenly made sense. But if it proved him wrong, then 20 years of humiliation had been built on nothing. I slowly opened the report. Pages of data appeared, genetic markers, percentages, scientific terms I barely understood. But there was one section that mattered: paternity match. My heart started beating faster. I scrolled, and then I saw it. Probability of paternity, 99%. My father was my biological father. There was no doubt. No question, no mystery. The joke he had repeated for 20 years was officially destroyed by science. For a second, I felt a strange wave of relief, but that relief disappeared almost instantly, because the report didn't stop there. Below the paternity confirmation was another section: family DNA comparison. The company had automatically compared my DNA with other profiles that existed in their database. And apparently, some people in my family had already taken DNA tests years ago. I clicked the tab. A new screen opened. My stomach dropped. Possible siblings detected. 2 names appeared: Ethan Whitmore, Lucas Whitmore, my younger brothers. But something about the numbers felt wrong. Very wrong. Next to Ethan's name, the report said, shared DNA, 12% next to Lucas. Shared DNA, 10%. I frowned. That didn't make sense. Siblings normally share around 50% DNA. My heart started racing. I refreshed the page. The numbers stayed the same. Then I read the explanation under the chart. These results indicate that the individuals listed are likely half-siblings or distant relatives. Half-siblings, not full siblings. I leaned back in my chair slowly. The kitchen suddenly felt too quiet, too small. For 20 years, my father had joked that I might not be his child. But the DNA report had just revealed something far stranger. I was his child, the only own. I stared at the screen again, trying to make sense of it. If my brothers weren't fully related to me, then that meant only one thing. They weren't fully related to my father either. My chest tightened. Because suddenly, my father's cruel jokes didn't look funny anymore. They looked ironic, almost tragic. The man who had spent 20 years questioning my existence might have been the only one in the family who didn't realize the truth. I closed my laptop, walked to the window. Outside, the city lights flickered in the dark like distant stars. My mind replayed every Thanksgiving dinner, every barbecue, every family gathering where my father laughed and said, "Are we sure she's mine?" I felt something strange then. Not anger, not sadness, something colder, something clearer. For 20 years, I had been the family joke, the mistake, the outsider. But now I held proof that flipped the entire story upside down. And suddenly I understood something important. Truth has a strange way of revealing itself at the worst possible moment. I walked back to the table, opened my laptop again, and started typing an email. Not a long one, just a few lines. Short, simple, direct. Subject line, Thanksgiving joke, final results message. Dad wanted to know if I was really his daughter. So I took the test. Here are the results. Then I attached the report. Every page, every chart, every number. At the bottom of the email, I added one final sentence. Looks like the joke turned out differently than expected. Then I selected the recipients. My parents, my brothers, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins. 32 family members. For a moment, my finger hovered over the send button. This email wouldn't just answer a question. It would start a war. Because once everyone saw those results, they wouldn't just learn something about me. They would learn something about my mother and about my father. Something neither of them had prepared for. I took a deep breath. Then I pressed send. The email left my inbox instantly. And somewhere across the city, phones started vibrating. Notifications began appearing. And the truth that had slept quietly for 25 years was about to wake up. The next family dinner was only 2 days away. And when my father opened that email at the table, my mother would faint. My father would drop his fork. And the entire room would fall into a silence so heavy that no one would ever forget it. Because the results didn't just prove I was my father's daughter. They proved something far more dangerous. Something that would tear my family apart. 2 days after I sent the email, my phone still hadn't stopped buzzing. At first it had been cousins. Confused messages. "Lana, is this real? Did you really send that DNA report? What exactly does it mean?" Then came the aunts. Then the uncles. Some of them tried to pretend they didn't understand the numbers in the report. But everyone understood the implication. Because the report didn't just prove that my father was my biological father. It suggested something much bigger. Something that no one in the Whitmore family had ever imagined. That maybe my brothers weren't his. No one mentioned it directly. But the silence said everything. And that silence followed us straight into Sunday dinner. My parents' house looked exactly the same as it always had. The same brick driveway, the same tall oak tree in the front yard, the same white porch light glowing softly against the evening sky. For 25 years, this house had been the center of my life. And somehow, tonight it felt like I was visiting a stranger's home. I parked my car and sat there for a moment, staring at the front door. My heart wasn't racing. If anything, I felt strangely calm, because the truth had already left my hands. The email had done its work. Now all I had to do was walk inside. When I opened the door, the house was already full. Voices filled the living room. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic drifted from the kitchen. Normal sounds, normal smells, but the atmosphere was anything but normal. The moment I stepped inside, conversations stopped. Not completely, but enough that I noticed. My Aunt Caroline looked at me first. Her eyes flickered between me and my mother across the room. Then she forced a smile. "Lena, you made it." "Of course," I said calmly. My mother stood near the kitchen counter. For a second, our eyes met. Her face looked pale, like she hadn't slept. She quickly looked away. My father was already sitting at the dining table, exactly where he always sat, head of the table, king of the room. When he saw me, he gave the same confident grin he'd worn for decades, like nothing had changed, like the email I had sent 2 days earlier didn't exist. "Look who finally arrived," he said loudly. Some relatives chuckled nervously. I took my seat, across from him, right where I had sat every Thanksgiving. Dinner started quietly. Too quietly. Normally, our family dinners were chaotic. People talking over each other, laughing, arguing about politics or sports. Tonight, everyone seemed careful, like they were walking through a room full of glass. My brothers Ethan and Lucas sat beside each other, whispering occasionally. I noticed they kept glancing at my father, then at my mother, then at me. They had seen the email too. Halfway through dinner, my father finally spoke again. He wiped his mouth with a napkin and leaned back in his chair. "Well," he said casually, "that was quite an email you sent, Lena." Every fork at the table stopped moving. No one looked at their food anymore. My father smiled, but there was something tight in that smile now. "Trying to embarrass your old man." I met his gaze. "I just answered your question." "What question?" "The one you asked at Thanksgiving." His grin faded slightly. "Oh, come on," he laughed. "That was a joke." "For 20 years?" The room went completely silent. My mother suddenly stood up. "Maybe we should talk about something else." But my father raised his hand. "No, no," he said. "Let's hear it." He leaned forward. "You went through all this trouble just to prove I'm your father?" "No," I said calmly. "I proved that already." My father frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" I looked around the table. 30 eyes staring back at me, waiting. Then I said the sentence that changed everything. The report didn't just test my DNA. My father's fork paused in midair. "What are you talking about?" "The company compares results with other profiles in their database." His expression hardened. And Ethan and Lucas already had profiles. My brothers looked up immediately. "What?" Ethan said. Lucas shook his head. "I never took a DNA test." I nodded. "Not recently." "But the system still had your genetic markers." My father leaned forward slowly. "Get to the point, Lena." So I did. "The report says Ethan and Lucas share around 10% DNA with me." Confusion spread across the table. My uncle frowned. "What does that mean?" I answered quietly. "It means they're not my full brothers." The words hung in the air like smoke. My father laughed suddenly. A loud, forced laugh. "That's ridiculous." But I noticed something strange. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at my mother. My mother's face had turned completely white. Her hand trembled against the kitchen counter. "Richard," she whispered. My father's smile disappeared. "Margaret," he said slowly. "Why does she think that?" My mother didn't answer. She just stared at the floor. And in that moment, everyone in the room understood. My aunt gasped. My cousin dropped her glass. Lucas stood up abruptly. "What the hell is she talking about?" My father's voice rose. "Margaret." Still no answer. Then suddenly, my mother collapsed. The sound of her body hitting the floor echoed through the room. Chairs scraped back. People shouted. My aunt rushed forward. "Call an ambulance." But my father didn't move. He just sat there, frozen, staring at my mother lying on the kitchen floor. Then slowly, his fork slipped from his fingers. It clattered against the plate, and the man who had spent 20 years laughing at the idea that I might not be his child finally realized something far worse. Because the DNA test had proven two things. First, I was his biological daughter, without any doubt. But second, I might be the only one. And as the ambulance sirens began echoing in the distance, I realized something terrifying. The real truth of our family hadn't even been revealed yet, because what my mother had hidden for 25 years was about to destroy everything my father believed about his life. The ambulance arrived within minutes. The paramedics rushed in, and my mother was lifted onto a stretcher. My father followed, pale and silent, muttering her name under his breath. I stayed behind with the rest of the family. Everyone's eyes were wide with fear, shock, and confusion. Whispers filled the room. Some were asking if my mother would be okay, but no one dared bring up the elephant in the room, the DNA results. Hours later at the hospital, my mother regained consciousness. Her eyes met mine, filled with both fear and resignation. I need to tell you everything," she whispered. I nodded, sitting beside her. The rest of the family waited outside. "My boys, Ethan and Lucas," she began, tears streaming down her face. "They're not Richard's. I made a mistake so long ago. I didn't know how to tell anyone. Not even Richard. Not you." When my father finally arrived, he looked as if the floor had been ripped from under him. His face was pale, his hands trembling. "My sons," he repeated. "Yes, my mother said," her voice shaking. "They are not your biological children. Only Lena, only you are." The room fell silent. My father's knees buckled, and he sat heavily on the hospital chair. No words came out, just disbelief. Outside, the news spread quickly through the family. Cousins, aunts, uncles, everyone was trying to process the shocking revelation. The Whitmore family, once considered perfect and untouchable, had just been exposed as a house built on secrets and lies. My brothers didn't say much. Ethan stared at the floor. Lucas avoided all eyes. They knew the truth now, and it changed everything. Later that night, in my room at the hospital, I sat quietly. I had wanted the truth for years. Now that I had it, it was heavier than I imagined. I realized something important. The truth doesn't just hurt the ones who lied. It shatters everyone involved. But it also frees you. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. Like I could finally claim my place in this world without lies shadowing it. And my father. He eventually came to me, long after the chaos had calmed. His voice was soft, almost unrecognizable. "I failed you, Lana," he said. "I was cruel, blind, and foolish. But you were my daughter. Only my daughter. That will never change." And in that moment, I realized something profound. Blood alone doesn't define a family, but the courage to face the truth. That does. The night was quiet. The hospital halls had emptied, leaving only the distant hum of machines and the faint scent of antiseptic. I sat alone by the window, watching the city lights flicker like fireflies. I could still hear my father's words echoing in my mind. "You are my daughter. Only my daughter." For 25 years, I had carried his doubts, his harsh words, and his jokes about DNA kits as if they were chains. I had questioned my worth, my place, my existence. And now I could finally breathe. I touched the bracelet my mother had given me years ago, the one she said would protect me. Ironically, it had been my shield all along. Against ridicule, against doubt, against the lies my family had wrapped around themselves. I whispered into the empty room, almost as if speaking to my past self, "Lana, you were never a mistake. You were always the truth waiting to be seen." Tears came unbidden, not from anger, not from resentment, but from release, from the weight of years finally lifting. My father entered quietly, sitting beside me without a word. His hands, once so commanding, now trembled slightly. I reached for them. I don't know how to say sorry for all of it," he whispered. I shook my head. "You don't have to. Just be here. Be present. That's enough." For the first time, we sat together, not as the distant, broken family I had known, but as people learning how to reconnect. Later, my brothers came. Ethan avoided my eyes at first, while Lucas lingered by the doorway. I'm sorry, Lana," Ethan murmured. "I didn't know. I never wanted to hurt you." And Lucas added, "I guess we were all pretending too long. I just want things to be honest now." I nodded, letting the silence stretch between us, not awkward, but real. Honest, healing. That night, I stood by the lake house, the place my grandmother had loved so dearly. The cedar floors, the smell of pine, the sunlight through the windows, it all felt alive again. I ran my hand along the wood, remembering her voice. "Build your life on calm ground, not noise." And that's exactly what I intended to do. I realized that family isn't only about shared blood. It's about shared truth. It's about respect, care, and the courage to confront the lies we've lived with. I had my father. I had my brothers, slowly coming back to me. And I had myself, the strongest version of me, forged through confrontation, resilience, and love. That night, I wrote in my journal, "I am not a mistake. I am not a shadow of someone else's expectations. I am Lana. I exist. I claim my life. I forgive. And I move forward unafraid." It was my declaration, my monologue, my freedom. The city lights reflected on the lake, dancing gently. Daniel came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "You okay?" he asked softly. I leaned into him, feeling the warmth and steadiness I had always needed. "I am," I said. "Finally, I really am." And for the first time, I smiled, not a nervous, cautious smile. Not one weighed down by fear or doubt, but a full human smile. A smile that belonged only to me. Because after 25 years of lies, jokes, and testing, I had finally found the truth. Not in a DNA kit, not in a will, not in anyone else's validation. The truth lived here in my chest, in my voice, in my life. And that truth, that was enough. To me, this story feels like a poignant journey of self-discovery and empowerment. Lena isn't just facing her father's cruel behavior or her family's drama. She is fighting for her own identity, her rights, and her emotional freedom. What strikes me most is how the story shows the inner strength and dignity of a person. No matter how harsh the circumstances, we can set our boundaries and refuse to bow to someone else's control or pressure. I believe Lana's choices and her resilience teach us that true self-respect isn't defined by wealth or authority. It comes from truth, courage, and honesty with oneself. The moment she realizes that her family was never perfect and that she herself can fill the void is what makes the story so real, relatable, and inspiring. Moreover, the dramatic monologues and human touches don't just add tension. They show us the delicate balance between power and love. Lana doesn't just prove her existence. She demonstrates that standing firm in truth and justice is the path to emotional liberation. Thanks for watching The Day.